When we think about the major source of fuel in the human diet, it's important to recognize that carbohydrates play a central role. In fact, they provide at least 50% or even more of the total caloric intake for the average person. Now, if we take a closer look at the types of carbohydrates we consume in our diet, we can divide them into two broad categories. First, we have polysaccharides. These make up about half of our dietary carbohydrates. They include things like starches and dextrins, which are primarily found in cereal grains and vegetables. Then, on the other hand, we have simple sugars. These account for the remaining half of our carbohydrate intake. The most common and abundant among them is sucrose. But we also commonly consume other simple sugars like lactose, maltose, glucose, and fructose. So, carbohydrates in various forms, whether complex or simple, make up a significant and essential part of our daily energy supply. Alright, let's talk about the structural features of carbohydrates. If we start with what carbohydrates really are, they can be described as polyhydroxyaldehydes or ketones, or sometimes compounds that give these substances when they undergo hydrolysis. In simpler terms, they're made up of carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen, and their ratio roughly looks like hydrates of carbon, which is CH2O. When it comes to classifying carbohydrates, they generally fall into two main groups. On one side, we have simple carbohydrates, which include monosaccharides and disaccharides. On the other side, there are complex carbohydrates, which cover oligosaccharides and polysaccharides. So, essentially, this classification helps us understand the diversity and complexity of carbohydrates in our diet and their structural differences. Let's dive into simple carbohydrates. The simplest form here is called monosaccharides. These are basic sugar units that can't be broken down into smaller sugars through hydrolysis. You might also hear them called simple sugars or monosaccharide residues. Among these, glucose stands out as the most abundant and nutritionally important one in nature. Moving on, when two of these monosaccharide units join together through covalent bonds, they form disaccharides. A common example is sucrose, which is made up of glucose and fructose. Sucrose is especially important nutritionally because it makes up about 1/3 of the carbohydrates in a typical Western diet.